Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. Today, we have a few things to get into, and before we get into the Around the NFL and the Panthers preview with the game in Philadelphia against the Eagles, we wanted to talk about some recent news, and it's regarding Diontae Johnson, who was a Carolina Panther for the first, I want to say, 6-7 games of this year. We shipped him out to Baltimore, moved up about, it seems like 15, 20 spots in the draft. Really didn't make a lot of sense at the time because he was our wide receiver one. He was producing admirably up to that point. But during his stint in Baltimore, he's not garnished a lot of targets. I think he has maybe one reception. It's nothing crazy.
Yep.
And he's now suspended for this week's game because of stuff that's happened in the locker room, him refusing to go out on the field against the Eagles, apparently. And it's just spiraled into this mess. And it goes back to the point that he started with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was drafted by that organization, and they're known for drafting some really good wide receivers that have produced over the past 10, 15, 20 years. But this just seems to be a constant dilemma with those guys, that they always have a knack for getting into trouble or finding themselves in situations where the new team they find themselves on is left scratching their head.
For sure. And if there was any doubt that Mike Tomlin isn't a top whatever coach of all time, every time a receiver leaves and does something, that just gives me more and more Mike Tomlin is the leader of all time, the locker room guy of all time, because we didn't hear anything about Antonio Brown while he was in Pittsburgh. And then you see what happens when he's on the Raiders. He was there for like 2 months, the helmet thing, the foot cryotherapy thing, bunch of stuff. Martavis Bryant didn't do a ton following the Steelers. I think he was the marijuana suspension for quite some time guy. Obviously, those rules have been less restrictive recently, but back then that was big for him. And now Diontae Johnson, who I thought when we traded for him, it was a steal. We got off of Dante's contract. Diontae Johnson had a manageable contract. He would be a free agent coming up. He performed well in the Raiders game and in the Falcons game. But then stuff didn't seem to go well. We traded him. I know you and I both didn't like the compensation at first that we got from the Ravens. But now on the Ravens, he has one target, and I think he's played 3 games. He obviously didn't play last game because he didn't want to go out there, leave the locker room. Not sure what that's about, but if he had just kept his head down and locked in and stayed with the Panthers, he could have had himself a nice payday in free agency. People like Panthers beat reporters have reported the Panthers were trying to extend him while he was here, but that didn't work out. He wanted to leave. There's rumors that he wasn't a strong locker room guy. Goes to Baltimore, who have had their own share of receiver depth issues. Like outside of Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman isn't wowing anybody, right? He could have had Diontae Johnson, that is, could have had a big role with Baltimore. But he chose to go in a different direction, so to speak, and now he's suspended for a game. And every game now, I think, is very important for Baltimore because they're a couple games behind the 8 ball with Pittsburgh now for the lead in the division. So it's just an unfortunate situation. And looking back, I'm certainly glad that we got rid of him. We didn't pay him it would have been well over $20 million because Judy got 19 a year. You see what Jerry Judy's doing now with his last game. So who knows, but Diontae Johnson's certainly tanked his own value coming up into this offseason. And it's bizarre to me that Jonathan Mingo, someone who I think we can agree isn't as talented, is having slightly more, but still more production on a bad offense like the Cowboys than Diontae Johnson is with possibly the MVP frontrunner.
Yeah, no, it's very head scratching. And I think it goes back to the point you made right at the top about Mike Tomlin. And what's interesting is you look back at Mike Tomlin's kind of coaching career prior to becoming defensive coordinator for Pittsburgh and then get elevated as the head coach. He was a secondary coach back with John Gruden in Tampa Bay. And I think he understood kind of the dichotomy of the wide receiver divas. He knew how to get in their heads. He knew how to kind of keep them in line. And you gave a list of great examples of wide receivers you never heard a peep from in Pittsburgh, but the second they leave, they're a problem for the other organization. And it just goes to show the type of leader he reason why that team has yet to have a losing season during his tenure. And I think that's true now because they're
9-2, I think, or 9-3, something like that.
So they've officially locked that in, and it's a crazy record to have. Everything seems to be clicking for them. They're playing really good football in terms of just defense and offense, and it's cool to see it come together because we haven't really seen a Pittsburgh Steelers team like this since before Big Ben retired. So again, really cool things for their organization. They seem to know that they were getting ahead of the 8 ball, and Diontae Jackson's playing great. So the trade has definitely worked out in their favor, and they continue to be on the rise. But I think unless you want to kind of talk any more about Diontae Johnson or just like the fact that he's probably going to get a 1-year prove-it deal in the offseason, which kind of sucks. Like you said, he was lining
something. It's going to be a single digit, obviously in the millions, so 7 digits, but a single million digit payday when he could have lined up something quite impressive. But it sucks to see, like you said, Diontae Jackson's playing quite well there. Well, he's doing the Dante cycle, I'll say, but we see more of the good than the bad on the highlights. He has 5 interceptions, I believe, this season, which is a pretty high mark for him. But I think we are moving on from this conversation, much like the Panthers moved on from Diontae Johnson. This is a big week for a lot of people. You know, the Christmas season's kind of kicking into gear. We have a buddy's wedding we're going to this weekend, so excited for that. But the most important thing this weekend happens to be that in our fantasy league and a lot of fantasy leagues out there, the playoffs start this weekend. And like I said on Tuesday, both of our teams are in the playoffs. But in our league, the numbers 1 and 2 seed get a bye this week. I'm the number 2 seed, so I don't have to worry this week. But Steven, you have a matchup this week to get into the semifinals there. And so I thought it would be a cool idea to look at some of the games that have huge fantasy implications for your matchup with our friend Maddie, because it's going to be an interesting one. You guys are projected close to win. It is week 14, so both of you have players on bye weeks, which is an interesting wrinkle. That's why it pays to get a first round bye because you don't have to deal with that. You're missing Zay Flowers. I know he's missing Nico Collins, 2 good receivers. But I think we can start with tonight's game, Thursday Night Football. Green Bay in Detroit. This will be the second time they've matched up this year. You have both Jordan Love and Jahmyr Gibbs. So this is good. I think you're hoping for this to be like a high octane scoring type of game.
Oh, if both teams are scoring 20, 30 plus points each, it's going to be a good day for probably both players. And Jahmyr Gibbs is that kind of guy where he's been fed a lot recently. And him and David Montgomery always seem to get in the end zone. So if Jahmyr Gibbs can have a 2-touchdown game, get about 20 points this week, that would be huge. For Jordan Love, it's just staying away from the mistakes and making sure he puts the ball in the end zone. I've kind of been, I wouldn't say screwed over in some of the weeks, but where Josh Jacobs gets a lot of the touches near the goal line when they're in the red zone, it takes away points from that quarterback. And we're in a super flex league, so that means we can start 2 quarterbacks at the same time. So getting a production from the quarterbacks is definitely key. So a barn burner, like you said, on Thursday night is going to be a huge boost for trying to get a leg up in this week. First week of the playoffs, wild card matchup with one of our fellow fantasy players. So I think
friends, league members,
fantasy
manager,
manager. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
there we go. I knew there was a word, but I was like, yeah, we're fantasy players, but we're team managers.
Regarding Jordan Love, I think this is something we saw even last year, that when they started to come on down the stretch, they were scoring at a high level and outpacing how bad their defense was. But even when they would get into the red zone, and I think particularly like the close 10-5, we saw Jordan Love struggle. And this is something that we saw again at the start of this year. I think it's just continued. So they're really leaning on Josh Jacobs. We talked about last week how Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all performing well on their new teams. But I think a big key is that they're scoring from pretty far out with Jordan Love, and he has to be better inside the red zone, I think, for the Packers to kind of get a leg back in the division race, because they're behind the Vikings now and behind the Lions, who are the number 1 seed. If we can like kind of keep it here on Thursday Night Football, I changed my pick right before we recorded to the Packers because of all the defensive injuries with the Detroit Lions. What are you thinking kind of outcome-wise for this game, which is going to be, I think, probably throughout the rest of the year for the Packers, this is their most important pivotal game for them if they want to get back in that race or get up on the wild card with Minnesota.
Yeah, no, they have two big matchups coming up, obviously this week against the Lions, and I think in a couple weeks against the Vikings. And like you said, this is pivotal for them. The Lions have a lot of guys on defense that are injured right now, especially on that defensive line. So if I had to guess what the game script is going to look like, at least for the Packers offense, they're going to lean into the run game early and often. They have the offensive line that can win in the trenches, especially against the Lions backups. And Josh Jacobs has been phenomenal for them. I mean, his yards after contact, I haven't checked after this past week, but going into week 13, he ranked, I believe, third behind Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. So 3 big free agent acquisitions we saw in the running back market have paid dividends for their respective teams. And I see that continuing tonight. So Aaron Glenn doing what he can to fit the run while still being able to guard against Jordan Love in the pass is going to be huge, because if you give Love one-on-one opportunity, he's got some of these big playmakers and Jaden Reed and Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs that can pop off at almost any given moment. So it will be very interesting to see Aaron Glenn's game plan. For the Lions, I think they just got to stay away from making mistakes. If they can continue to move the ball like they did against Green Bay last time these two teams faced in Lambeau, I think that they can dictate the game script, go on long drives where they're just burning clock and allowing their defense not to be on the field, getting torched by Matt LaFleur and the game plan that they're going to have tonight.
For sure. We know both running backs are capable of toting the rock, running the clock down, that sort of thing. If I'm correct, I think the last game or last matchup between these two was 24-14. I think this one might be a little more high scoring just because of the Detroit Lions defensive holes right now. But I think we both agree for now the Packers have a pretty good chance in this one for a tough division game for them this week. On to Sunday. Now, this past game, the Thursday game, you have both players. Sunday, your opponent has both Kirk Cousins and Bijan Robinson in that game where Atlanta goes to Minnesota. The Kirk Cousins homecoming, I guess you could call it a revenge game because he felt slighted that they were going to draft a rookie QB, so he decided to leave. And then what did Atlanta do? They go and draft a rookie QB. If Kirk Cousins plays like he did against the Chargers, are we going to see that rookie QB this week? Like, do you think we could see Michael Penix come out at the half and maybe try to engineer a comeback or something like that?
I mean, according to Next Gen Stats, Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball with probably the least amount of velocity right now in the NFL. And the last time we saw a drop in velocity from a quarterback that was approaching that 40 number, I think he might have been over 40 at that time, but that was Peyton Manning. And it was just, you saw that he could not operate the offense. He knew where he wanted to go with the football. He just couldn't get it there. And Kirk Cousins obviously made some head-scratching decisions against the Chargers, but him not being able to zip it in, I think, caused several of those turnovers this past Sunday. And Brian Flores operates and runs and calls a very opportunistic defense. I mean, we've seen Andrew Van Ginkel take a couple, I think, interceptions to the house. They don't have scrubs, in my opinion, on the outside with Byron Murphy and Stephon Gilmore. So I think they can definitely force Kirk Cousins to do uncomfortable things, load the box, and dare him to throw it. And until he proves that he can on time with speed, I think this is an advantage to the Minnesota Vikings, and we could see Michael Penix in. It's just going to depend on how bad it's looking at halftime. If it's a close game, I think Atlanta may just stick with Kirk Cousins because he has been their starter all year.
For sure, and we talked about with the Packers and Lions, the importance of the division with this game. Obviously, the Vikings are in that same division, but I think what's more important to look at is the Falcons and Buccaneers are both 6-6 now. And while the Falcons have the tiebreaker, they beat the Bucs twice. They lose this game. You know who the Bucs are playing this week? It's the Raiders, which I don't know if you know about the Raiders. They're not super good. So if the Bucs are able to win that game and Atlanta loses this one, the Bucs will hop into first place in the NFC South. That was your preseason prediction, like who would win each division. You said the Bucs for the NFC South, so that would be good for you. And hopefully for your fantasy stock this week, you would want Atlanta to not score a ton because he has 2 Atlanta players, and I kind of think the Vikings are going to be able to hold them in check, maybe spoil Kirk Cousins' homecoming there, because like he wanted to be there, but they didn't want him, and I guess the Falcons don't want him for the future either. Another Sunday game with another NFC South team is the New Orleans Saints going to the Giants, and in this one you have Malik Neighbors and your opponent has Alvin Kamara. So this is the first game we're talking about where there's a big offensive player on both teams that I think the teams are going to try to funnel their offense through. Taysom Hill, I think it was an ACL, right? And he's going to be out for the remainder of the season. So Kamara is like the weapon on that Saints offense versus a pretty poor Giants defense. And on the flip side, Malik Neighbors is going to be the guy for the Giants here. What offense do you think has the advantage in this matchup as the Saints kind of look to get going? Maybe they have a stake in the division if the Bucs lose, the Falcons lose, and the Panthers continue to lose.
Yeah, I think if we're going to look at the Saints, I like their offense under Clint Kubiak. I think he's masked a lot of the offensive line deficiencies. When you look at a lot of the advanced metrics, whether it's pass block win rate or run block win rate or PFF grades or SIS grades for the offensive line, the Saints aren't really good. But with some of their inside zone running schemes, they get Alvin Kamara out in space and to the second level. And so we just saw a few weeks ago what Chuba Hubbard did to this Giants defense in Germany. Granted, the turf was a little bit more slicker. It tends to be overseas, but that's where I think the advantage is. I think they're going to be able to lean on Alvin Kamara. He's going to have a big day, and that's going to suck for me because I'm going to need Malik Neighbors racking up targets and receptions in order to keep pace and have those players cancel out. Do I think they're going to cancel out? No. But what I can hope for is that Alvin Kamara doesn't go off for a 40-point game like he did a couple years ago on Christmas and just spoil my wild card appearance. So that's the fingers crossed. I can deal with 20, 25 points, but once you start hitting 40 to maybe even 50 points, that's where things can get out of hand really fast.
And on the other side with the Giants, I'm not sure we've seen a definitive starter this week between Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. Don't know if DeVito is back healthy. They did have the long break since they played on Thanksgiving, so maybe he'll be back in there. But Drew Lock did not inspire a lot of confidence as far as passing the ball. He had the crazy batted interception that was a pick six against DeMarvion Overshown. Most of his production came with his legs. He did have the rushing touchdown early in that Cowboys game, but their offense just looks like quite bad. And Malik Neighbors, I think, is good enough to make up for it. Like, he'll get the targets, I think, but I don't know if Locke will be accurate enough, if he'll have the zip on the ball to get it there. And for the Giants, as far as they go, they're going to be looking at that number one draft pick, trying to lock that in. Not the number one seed. I don't think we'll. Yeah,
you're jumping ahead to the Eagles. That's the Eagles.
I don't think we'll be seeing the Giants number one and anything anytime soon, other than maybe the draft. We talked about the Bucs and the Raiders. I think the Giants are going to try to vie for that number one spot, and maybe we'll see Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward passing to Malik Neighbors this time next year. That one's going to be up in the air, but I think this is a very pivotal game for you. The most pivotal game, I think, however, happens to be on Monday night, where we see the Cincinnati Bengals going to Dallas to play the Cowboys. And your opponent has Joe Burrow, who has been known to put up numbers this year. He leads the league in passing yards. But you have Jamar Chase. So anything Burrow does that involves Chase will be canceled out. You'll actually be favored because, receptions and receiving yards are worth more than passing yards. Receiving touchdowns are worth more than passing touchdowns. But I think you're hoping for like a dynamic Cincinnati Bengals offensive performance, which it seems to be the case like every week. And this time it's against the Cowboys, who I don't think the Cowboys are going to be able to score 40 points to beat them. So I think we're going to be looking at a Bengals team that wants to get one and might get one. But as far as what you are looking to see and what your opponent's looking to see, a lot of offense in this game.
Yeah, on both sides. I could see CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase having some really good days on Monday night. What's interesting is Joseph Bryan, his tag on Twitter's @QualityStats, and he does some writing for PFF. He's worked on some models which look to predict kind of target share or targets going into a week. And the last time Jamar Chase headlined his model, but the PFF's article, Jamar Chase went for 50 plus points against the Baltimore Ravens. So he has a great matchup this week against the Cowboys that like playing a lot of man coverage, single high looks, which is going to give one-on-one opportunities to one of the more explosive and dynamic playmakers currently in the NFL. So this is a game where Jamar Chase could eat, but because my opponent has Joe Burrow, if Chase is eating, that probably means Burrow is eating. So the big thing here is that Chase would need to get a lot of the touchdowns Joe Burrow's throwing, and he's got to rack up receptions and yards in a PPR league to help offset what Burrow might get in this game against I wouldn't say a terrible Cowboys defense, but this isn't the Cowboys defense we've seen over the past couple of years.
For sure, a terrible run defense. And yeah. I know a lot of people with the Zach Moss was their starter to start the year. Chase Brown is like a big fantasy football name right now, and maybe he gets a lot of touches there. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's including last week, but I know since T. Higgins came back before last week, again, I don't know, but he had more targets than Jamar Chase had. Now, the Cowboys defense isn't super stout on the back end in terms of size. They do have Israel Mukwamu, who's like a bigger safety. Maybe he can match up there, but I think Higgins has an opportunity to beat up on Trayvon Diggs if that's the matchup there. But I really like Jamar Chase's matchup. Like you said, if that guy's article portends the same way it did with the Ravens game, then you might be happy with a Jamar Chase 50 burger type of performance. What I think is interesting about this game is this will be the last two players that each of you have, and I know from like my own like personal experiences, I hate having players on Monday night. I hate my opponents having players on Monday night because you just never know, right? I played against a guy with Kareem Hunt when they were playing the Bucs, and he got the touchdown in overtime, and I didn't know, and I woke up to it very mad. So that's going to be maybe a head scratcher for you, maybe like be shaking your legs, seeing who's going to score there. But that should be not an interesting game, a fun game to watch for both of you guys there. But how are you feeling about your outlook with these 4 games and the players that you guys have matching up?
I feel good about my wide receivers. I went wide receiver heavy in this draft. I was able to draft guys like Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. Like you mentioned earlier, Zay Flowers is on a bye. But that's what I got to lean into is those star players continuing to be stars. And it's just the other role players that are going to be starting to just do your job. Get the expected points, maybe do something a little bit more. But I think if those things hit, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say questions on my opponent's roster, but some of his players have been boom or bust. And if some of them go bust, that's what could lead into a Monday night where as long as Chase scores as much as Joe Burrow does, I might be safe. But going into Monday Night Football, that is going to be very interesting. I think the most memorable matchup I've ever had in terms of guys going back and forth on Monday night was back in 2018 when I had Patrick Mahomes and my opponent had Tyreek Hill, and it was that legendary Rams game. And we were going back and forth. Mahomes would throw a touchdown pass. I'd go back up leading, and then he'd throw an interception. My opponent would take the lead. And I think it came down to the point where it was neck and neck because Tyreek Hill was going off that game, that it was one of Mahomes' last interceptions, and I barely lost by like a point or two. So it can definitely provide a lot of intrigue, a lot of heartbreak. And I'm hoping in this case, I'm not on the end of the heartbreak.
I was going to ask you, I thought your most memorable fantasy matchup was when you tied with someone like down to the decimal point tying, which is bizarre, like 1 in a million chance there. But I'm rooting for you this week. Hopefully you're able to pull off the win there. And to kind of bring that all back around, hopefully the Panthers are able to pull off the win in Philly at the Link. I'm not too hopeful, but there are some positives that we can look at going into this game. First, I just want to show the clip of Bryce Young's final touchdown. So if you're watching on YouTube here, this is the one to win the game. It was against a cover 3 zone. We talked about the numbers about how Bryce played well against the zone this past week. We know Vic Fangio likes to deploy a lot of zone, so that might be a good look for the Carolina Panthers there. And the thing that I am most hopeful for with this game is that both Jalen Coker and Jatavian Sanders are practicing in full this week. They're both of them are practicing today, Thursday, not in a red jersey. They have their helmet and everything. So if we can get both of them back, hopefully that can cut down on some of the drops we saw from some of the secondary and tertiary weapons, drops that left 10, 20 yards on the field and left the Panthers drives on the field, particularly in the second half when, like we talked about, we dominated that first half. The score might not have reflected it, but in the second half, drops and missed opportunities took the game from us. Hopefully, if our guys are in there, Coker, Sanders, along with Thielen and Leggett and everyone else, we won't have as many of those forced mistakes and be able to stay in this game for the long haul. For the long haul into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's going to be interesting is the touchdown pass there at the end. Adam Thielen was against 3 look. The Philadelphia Eagles defense that we're facing has a 78th percentile expected points added when playing cover 3. So it will be very interesting to see, are we going to have plays that are going to be in the benefit of one of Bryce Young's pick sixes came against Gus Bradley's Indianapolis Colts last year on R3 buzz looks. So it's one of those things that has he learned enough over the past year and a half to adjust to some of the looks Vic Fangio may give him. And obviously Fangio was known for a lot of his cover 4 looks in recent years, but really his bread and butter, and it's the bread and butter for a lot of defenses in the NFL, are cover 1 and cover 3. And those are the two the Eagles are best at. So we're going to have to see, can our guys beat man coverage with guys like Jalen Coker and JT Sanders practicing and looking like they may play? We're going to need them to win one-on-one matchups to give Bryce Young an opportunity to go out and win this game against a very, very good Eagles defense. And before we kind of continue on into breaking down, I just want to show Jalen Hurts, Bryce Young real quick about how good they've been this year against different coverages. And Bryce Young obviously didn't have a hot start. That's what's dragging down a lot of his efficiency. But cover 1, cover 3, both below the 50th percentile in terms of quarterback play. And that will be very interesting to see if that continues or if he will show what he's shown in recent weeks, where he can beat man coverage, where he can beat different zone looks and be efficient while doing it. So definitely a big test for Bryce Young in this offense. What are some of the other things that you're looking at with this game in particular and advantages that we may or may not have?
Well, we'll go to advantages because there's not many. I think that if we can build off of what Jonathan Brooks was able to do last week and get him more involved, we're going to be more dynamic out of the backfield. On 15 snaps last week, Jonathan Brooks forced 5 missed tackles. Out of all the games this year, and Chuba's played like the majority of the snaps in all the games, his highest is 7. So if we're able to get both of them involved, have Jonathan Brooks be the guy who can make people miss in space, the Eagles' linebacking core, I would say, is the weakness of their defense. If we're able to get them to the second level, that might be able to sustain drives and allow Bryce to have opportunities against those cover 1 and cover 3 looks that Fangio likes to deploy. Maybe with JT Sanders, who is known to high point and box out some of the smaller players. We saw it against the Saints, and we saw it a couple weeks ago against the Chiefs. That's what I'm looking for, is the run game. But on the other end, the Eagles are, I would say, the hottest team in the NFL right now. I think their win streak's up to 8 or 9 now. I don't remember after beating the Ravens, but it's coming off of the legs of Saquon Barkley, right? This is a guy that's leading the league in scrimmage yards. He's still on pace to break Adrian Peterson's MVP numbers, and I believe to break Eric Dickerson's numbers now. He has an extra game, so it's not that impressive, but 2,100 plus rushing yards is still impressive. And with our porous run defense, I think Saquon is going to have a day against us and really be the driving force that moves the ball down the field for them. I know they have A.J. Brown. I know Devontae Smith, I think, is going to be healthy for this game, but it's going to start up front with Saquon driving them, just like it's going to start for us with Chuba and Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard, and where they might find the most success. And for those watching on YouTube, I have a graphic up that's showing different running types or run concepts and how well the Panthers are and how good the Eagles defense is at stopping those. So inside zone, we see a little under 4 yards per clip. The Eagles, in a lot of different categories, hold a lot of people under 5 and 4 yards, and inside zone is no different, especially when they have Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in the interior. You might not necessarily find a lot of success running there. but man duo looks, outside zone, that's where we may have an advantage. The Eagles allow almost 5 yards to man duo looks, and outside zone, it's a little over 4.5 yards. Use that to your advantage. Get these playmakers you have in your backfield out in space to where they're finding the cutback lane and able to break a 5, 10, 15-yard run to kind of keep the chains moving, invigorate this offense, have this offensive line playing downhill, because that's going to help you stay in this game. And then to your point about Saquon Barkley, again, if you're looking on YouTube, you're going to see the breakdown now for the Eagles offense compared to the Panthers defense. And the Panthers defense has been very porous. Outside zone is something that we've struggled to stop, and the Eagles are really good at. So I don't know if Kellen Moore is going to lean into that or just stick with his strengths, which typically from a percentage standpoint is inside zone and man duo concepts. So some of the things that we tend to do and they do really well. And so it'll be very interesting to see if anybody kind of takes a pivot from their usual game script to exploit maybe a weakness that the other defense has in terms of the run game.
Yeah, and if you go back to the one looking at the Eagles defense, if you can think about last game, the Buccaneers sold out to stop the interior run. Chuba wasn't getting anything there. Obviously, Vita Vea, like Jordan Davis, is a massive human, hard to block with just one guy, and can take up a lot of space and allow guys like Kalijah Kancey and their linebackers to come down. It's going to be the same thing versus the Eagles. Jordan Davis can allow Jalen Carter, some of their edge players who are good against the run, to come in and make the stops there. But what I remember seeing in that Buccaneers game is then we would get the ball on the outside. That's when Chuba was able to break tackles. Like I think about the one right before the end of the half where he gets to the left sideline, picks up about 9 yards. The one where it was a 3rd and 1 and he gets hit in the backfield and like kind of shakes the guy and goes out, gets it. That was a little pitch play, but it was the outside runs. Jonathan Brooks too, his big runs came on the outside. If we're able to get in space, I think we have an advantage there against maybe some of the rookie younger corners that they have. Granted, they're playing super well right now, both Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, but they are inexperienced. So maybe we get a bigger back like Jonathan Brooks out there and have a matchup there. But on the flip side, like you were looking at, Saquon is also really good at getting outside. The thing is, though, J.C. Horn, for all corners in the league, leads the league in run stops. So we might be seeing a lot of J.C. Horn in run support once Saquon's able to get to the outside, get to the second level, because he will be getting to the second level. I have no doubt in my mind there, especially if I think I read Jadeveon Clowney is out this week. I know he didn't practice yesterday or today, but I think the Panthers posted a tweet yesterday saying he would be out for this week. That's a huge blow. He's one of the better run defender edge players in the league. We're going to have to see a guy like Diontae Johnson step up. He had a couple really good run stops versus the Bucs, but all credit to Bucky Irving. Saquon Barkley is a different beast, and I think that's going to be the key factor there. How much can Saquon do to set up, not even just to set up the offense, but to carry them? And then off of the back of that, Jalen Hurts can throw it to A.J. Brown, throw it to Goddard, Devontae Smith, and then when they get down to the 1 yard line, steal their touchdowns and be a vulture there. But that leans into what I said on Tuesday. I thought multiple Eagles skill players would have 100 yards. I'm still sticking there. And while I would love the Panthers to win, I think this is going to be an Eagles home win to continue their win streak.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything that you said there. It will be interesting because we saw Cooper DeJean or Cooper DeJean. I don't know. Do you know what pronunciation he goes by, like the French pronunciation or more American?
I do think it's DeJean.
Okay.
That's what I saw when I was doing his college stuff, but I couldn't tell you. You know, it's like Xavier Leggett is Leggett, not Leggett, and you know. When people come to the NFL and we see their names written out on a piece of paper, but once they say, "Hey, this is how I'd like my name pronounced," you never know. So it's whatever he wants, honestly, because if he can pick up and like hit stick Derrick Henry, he can pronounce his name however he wants, and we just gotta live with it.
Well, that's what I was going to get into, because you brought up J.C. Horn being a great tackler in the run game, and then obviously what Cooper DeJean did against Derrick Henry. I wonder if we're going to see kind of those open field tackles by some of these cornerbacks in the game, and that's almost going to be the highlight reel. And it will be very interesting to see. We've seen J.C. Horn track down a couple guys before and make plays. I remember Tyron Tracy, big run against the Giants in Germany. He was able to save a touchdown, and it's just those hustle plays are going to be so critical and just slowing this Eagles offense down. I don't think we're going to stop them with just the guys that are currently on the roster, but if you can make their life a little bit difficult, force a couple mistakes, that's going to allow Bryce Young and this offense to stay in the game. So it will be interesting to see what all plays out on Sunday. I would not personally be surprised if the game is over by halftime, just because this is one of the best defenses in the league. And their offense, their biggest strength is arguably the biggest weakness on the Panthers defense. So all that being said, I'm looking forward to it nonetheless. Wish the Panthers will at least make it close and bring it down to the wire like they have against the Chiefs and the Bucks. And that's what's going to give the fans hope. This is football we haven't necessarily seen from the team in a couple years, since probably Steve Wilkes was the interim head coach, of just competitive, tough Panthers football. And you just want to see that as a fan, regardless of the outcome.
For sure. Tough competitive football in December is something, like you said, since Steve Wilkes. Without that, the year where he was the interim, we haven't seen since like 2017 when we last went to the playoffs. So that's a big hope for me. I think we're going to get into perfect takes territory here as we're wrapping up. And since it's the Thursday one, we like to do the perfect parlay, so to speak. We didn't have an episode last week, so didn't have one there. But prior to that, I've gotten all three of the things I've said on here that are written in stone or written out in the internet. I've gotten them correct, and I think I'm going to try to continue it this week. So tonight, like we talked about, I think the Packers can really take advantage of the defensive holes and injuries on the Detroit Lions. And I'm going to say a player from each skill position group for the Packers will get in the end zone tonight. So that's running back, receiver, and tight end. I'm leaning towards Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed, and Tucker Kraft, but I'll have to look at the odds and stuff. But I like the multiplicity that Matt LaFleur can call in the offense. And I think that they have capable weapons at every level. Jordan Love too. He's not like he's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Josh Allen, but he can run it when he needs to. And I think all different levels of that offense can score. I'm looking to see at least three of them score tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And if you want to complete the perfect parlay, the other side of it is going to relate to the Panthers-Eagles game. You obviously indicated on Tuesday you thought two of their skill position players would get over 100 yards. I'm going to double down on that and say Saquon Barkley officially will get over 150 plus yards and 2 touchdowns on Sunday. And if you're just to do that separately, you get almost plus 500 odds. So a good little boost there, so to speak. And you pair that with the anytime touchdown props of Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed, and Tucker Kraft. I'm sure you got yourself a nice little bundle. So I think that concludes the perfect parlay, our perfect takes. For Thursday, like you said, you're undefeated. So hopefully that continues this week. And I got a perfect take right last week. So hopefully that continued trend.
We're on a hot streak.
We'll be here on Tuesday talking about our winnings, and that's the hope and prayer.
Well, I like your take. I think Saquon is going to have a field day. As a guy who is a Saquon fantasy holder, I hope he takes that performance. Maybe he doesn't get that this week, but gets it like the next 3 weeks, like when I need him to. Or maybe he does it both and ends up breaking all the rushing records that have ever been set. Who knows? But I think that's going to do it for us, for myself and Steven. We are Purrfect Takes. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I know both Apple and Spotify are doing their replay, and they're showing what you've listened to, music and podcasts this year. So if you listen to us a lot, maybe we'll pop up on there, and that'll be a nice little treat for us to see. But until then, we will catch you guys on Tuesday, and keep pounding.